All right, by now you read the dedication page in Muggy Maggie, and you saw that it said to a third grade girl who wondered why no one ever wrote a book to help third graders learn read cursive writing. So, what do you think this book is about? Many of you already have read the first chapter with me, and you know that it's about a little girl who doesn't want to learn how to write cursive handwriting. And why is that? Well, be a lot of reasons, but maybe because she thinks it's going to be too hard. Maybe she doesn't like the way it looks. Maybe she just doesn't want to learn something new because she's being told she has to learn something new in third grade. So sometimes being told you have to do something makes you not want to do it. All right, so she doesn't like the way it looks. She doesn't like learning how to write. So now we're going to move on to chapter 2 and find out why she wants to stick to printing for all her notes. Chapter 2. The next day, after the third grade monitors had led the flag salute, which means the Pledge of Allegiance, changed the date on the calendar, fed the hamster, and done all the housekeeping chores that third grade monitors do in the morning, Mrs. Leeper faced her class and said, "Today is going to be a happy day." The third grade looked hopeful. "Today we take a big step in growing up." What do you think that's going to be? Said Mrs. Leeper. "We are going to learn cursive handwriting. We are going to learn to make our letters flow together." Mrs. Leeper made flow sound like a long, long word as she waved her hand in a graceful, flowing motion. "She calls that exciting," thought Maggie, slumping in her chair. What does that tell you about Maggie if she's slumping in her chair? Yeah, she doesn't want to do it. "How many of you have ridden on a roller coaster?" asked Mrs. Leeper. Half the members of the class raised their hands. Mrs. Leeper wrote on the chalkboard, A, C, D, M, N. Many letters start up slowly, just like a roller coaster, and then drop down, she said, and she traced over her first stroke of each letter with colored chalk. Then she went on the demonstration how the roller coaster climbed almost straight up. After the paper monitor passed out paper, the class practiced. Not whole letters, but roller coaster strokes. Maggie did as she was told until she grew bored and began to draw one long roller coaster line that rose and fell, turned and twisted, and rose again. So many of the class needed help with their strokes that Mrs. Leeper did not get around to Maggie. The next day after strokes, the class practiced whole letters, some with loops that went up, some with loops that went down. This was difficult. The third grade frowned, worried, struggled, and asked Mrs. Leeper whether they were doing it right. Then they learned to connect letters with straight lines. Maggie went on drawing roller coasters until Mrs. Leeper noticed. "Why, Maggie," she said, "why haven't you been working on your loops and lines?" "I am working," said Maggie, "on roller coasters." Mrs. Leeper looked thoughtfully at Maggie, who tried to look happy. "Roller coasters are not cursive," said the teacher. "I know," agreed Maggie, "but I don't need cursive. I use our computer." "Maggie, I think you had better stay after school so we can have a little talk," said Mrs. Leeper. "I have to catch my bus," said Maggie with her sweetest smile. That afternoon, Maggie examined cursive writing wherever she found it. "Why does your writing on the grocery list lean over backward?" she asked her mother. "Mrs. Leeper says letters should lean forward as they were walking against the wind." "Well, I'm left-handed, and my teachers didn't show me how to turn my paper," answered Mrs. Schultz. Who's Mrs. Schultz again? Yep, that's her mother. "And what are those little circles floating around?" asked Maggie. Her mother laughed. "When I was in junior high, girls often made circles instead of dots over their eyes. We thought it was artistic or something. I don't really remember. That evening, Maggie stood at her father's side as he wrote a letter on the computer. When he pulled the paper out of the printer, he picked up a pen and wrote at the bottom his signature. "What does that say?" asked Maggie. "That's how I sign my name," said her father. "Sidney Schultz." "You didn't close your loops," Maggie pointed out. "You are supposed to close loops on letters that have pieces that hang down." She had learned a thing or two in spite of herself. "Whoops," said Mr. Schultz, and he closed his loops. So in chapter 2, Maggie gives Mrs. Leeper a lot of excuses and why she doesn't want to learn cursive handwriting. So what I'd like you to do is tell me, what excuse did she give Mrs. Leeper for not staying after school? Why did she say she couldn't stay after school? And why do you think she used her sweetest smile? Explain that, okay? And next time we will talk about that, and you comment below, okay? We will talk to you next time with chapter 3.